Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the podcast series, Careers in Science. My name is Sean Hughes, a chemistry teacher at John Abbott College, and I started this series to shed light on the many opportunities that await high school, CEGEP, and university students who are interested in pursuing jobs in science. Reflecting back on my own experience in school, I always had an interest in science. I loved it, but apart from the usual suspect jobs of a doctor or a lawyer, I really didn't know what I could do with a science education. And so what I hope this series can do is shed some light on some of the wonderful opportunities that could await you should you elect to pursue science in school, and to put a spotlight on many jobs that you may not have ever thought of. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest today, Kristen Moulton. Kristen is a manager of program development for medical devices and clinical interventions and is currently employed at the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health. She has spent the bulk of her career at the agency, working both with pharmaceutical review teams and medical devices teams. Kristen obtained her Bachelor's of Arts in Psychology at the University of Calgary, and then moved on to do her Master's of Science in Health Technology Assessment and Management at Université de Montréal. Welcome, Kristen.
Hi.
Kristen, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm glad we have a chance here to catch up. I'm going to ask you a quick question, just a bit of an icebreaker here. So you grew up in Calgary,
hmm
eventually moved to Ottawa for work, ended up in the Montreal area, and now
Yep.
you find yourself way out in Sherbrooke. What did you love the most about each of those cities? What do you miss the most? And what could you do without each of those cities?
Okay, so obviously the thing I miss the most about Calgary is my family. So I grew up there and my family still lives there, so I miss that a lot. But other than the people, I miss the proximity to the Rocky Mountains. I spent a lot of time there as a kid and as a young adult, and I miss the mountains dearly. And even though they are at altitude, I feel like that's where I can take the biggest breaths. When it comes to Ottawa, Ottawa is like a warm hug. It's like a small town, but an actual city. So it's got all the amenities of a city. Um, but it's just comfortable and easy to get around. And I really like that about Ottawa. Montreal, I miss the food. The food scene in Montreal is one of the best. I still think about meals I've had there, and were we not in a pandemic, would be frequently going there back for food. um, and there's something to be said for like a hot bagel at midnight. Pretty great. When it comes to Sherbrooke, I guess it's an outdoor place. So, and I mean, again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So, one of the things I like is the space. We have space, we have not a huge population. It's a great place to raise kids. So, that's sort of what I like about here. Things I do not miss. I do not miss Alberta politics. I don't think I have to go any further than that. When it comes to Ottawa, but I don't miss the slush. I don't know, I have, maybe it's because it's the first time I really experienced commuting in slush, but there's something about it. Lots of slush there. For Montreal, I don't miss the traffic. It's bad. It's bad.
Yeah.
And then probably, I mean, one thing I don't like about Sherbrooke is almost the opposite of Montreal. Like, I haven't had good sushi in so long. I just want some good sushi.
All right. So why I bring this up is because obviously you're well traveled, and part of that well traveling is largely in part because of school and because of work. So I
Mhm.
want to take you back in time, all the way back to high school, and you're sort of thinking about, well, what do you want to do with your life? Was it always science, or was it always something else that you had in mind?
I don't think it was always science. I always was interested in science. I probably had like the very can I swear on the podcast? Can I call myself a basic bitch? I had a bit of that, and maybe it's not the same anymore, but like people of my age very classically wanted to become a marine biologist. So there was like that science part in me, and I really enjoyed, I enjoyed my science classes, other than physics. It was not my thing. To be honest, I wanted to be anything but a teacher because my parents were teachers and I spent my whole life around teachers. And I like them a lot, but I did not want to be them. So I think I probably was kind of trending towards science, but didn't have a distinct, like, had to be science.
What else were you on the fence about then? If not science, what else?
I don't know. I think I was one of those people that didn't quite know. I liked what I liked, but I didn't really have a complete plan. I kind of figured, okay, I'll go and I'll see what happens.
Did you kind of follow the line of thinking of that if I did science, it'll keep some doors open?
I think so. Yeah, I kind of figured this. I'm good at this, so if I go and if I learn more, maybe I'll find the element that I want. I kind of figured it would be in biology, but didn't end up being quite there. But I guess in the long run, pretty close.
So you didn't experience the Quebec CEGEP system, right? So we go to grade
No,
11, we have our 2 years of CEGEP, and then you're off to university. For you, I assume it was grade 12, grade
yeah,
13, and then off
nope,
to
grade 12.
university, grade
Yeah,
12, and
grade
then
12
off
and
to
off to
university.
university. Yeah,
All right. So you enrolled in the biology program, as I understand it.
yeah.
What happened in that first year?
So in that first year, I don't think I learned how to study in high school. I think things came pretty fairly easy to me. So I could get by and more than get by, I could do quite well on minimal studying. So I got into university and suddenly didn't have the skills that I needed in order to properly learn what I needed to learn and do well on tests. I think I was probably learning some of it, but I just didn't have the skills to do tests. So I did horribly my first year. I took
Oh,
so I took biology, I took chemistry, took some math classes there that I think I withdrew from one of my math classes. I failed a chemistry class and I just didn't like I spent that first year just not really knowing what to do and eventually found that I took a psychology class and I found that really interesting and it sort of naturally because of that interest gradually learned how to study because of the things I found interesting. And eventually, I think it was my third year, I actually got an award for the biggest, like the highest increase in GPA or something like that. So I
wow.
really found what I at the time was good at and what I was interested in. So
I was about to ask you, was it that you were good at it and that's why you pursued it, or was it because you were genuinely interested in the matter that you were studying?
I think it was more of a genuine interest. It was so I took both the sort of social psychology, but also the experimental design, the biopsychology, sort of. And I think, like, I really think it was some of those biopsych classes and the brain psych classes that is when I learned how to study and realized, oh, okay, yeah, I go, no, I get this now. You'd think I would have learned it in high school, but didn't.
But that's not an uncommon story, right? I mean,
No,
I
I
think
don't think so.
I think everyone at some stage of their education hits a wall with something. For myself, it was organic chemistry. That was the
Mm,
first real wall I hit where my poor study habits finally caught up to me.
yeah.
And I struggled with it, I guess, until organic two, about
Hmm.
halfway through, when an ex-girlfriend kind of pointed out to me, you don't actually study enough. And it was like the bell went off in my
Yeah.
head, like, well, maybe I need to study more.
Yeah.
um, and and lo and behold, things vastly improved. Like, it wasn't
Mhm.
about studying the night before or 2 nights before. It was actually putting the work in ahead of time.
Yeah.
And that helped at least forge a different mindset when I got to university. So that helped a lot with that first year to transition.
Mhm.
But even then, things didn't really change for me until I got some time in the lab.
Mm.
I think I started to understand a little bit or
Yeah.
appreciate better what it was I was learning. It was looking at other people's experimental results and experimental design. And once you kind of are in that mindset, the studying just became easier. I have to admit, I took some psychology courses too. And I think what made studying psychology easy in a way was one, genuine interest. Two was also the instructional design I felt was really helpful
Yeah.
too.
Well, I mean, there's a psychology of learning and fascinating, funnily enough, some of those people use that in their
Incredible.
teaching.
When you graduated with your
Mhm.
psychology degree, what was going through your mind at that point in terms of, do I go out and get a job? Do I want to go look at this a little bit further? What was going through your head?
So I figured I would go back to grad school and do clinical psychology. That was sort of what I figured I would do. So I set out to get some work experience conducive to that. I worked, for some social service intake for a bit. And then I was looking for jobs in the psychology labs at the University of Calgary. And I did. I worked in the addictive behaviors lab for, I think, 2 years, and I worked on a study about for gambling treatment. And it was, well, being part of the, interviews and being part of the recruitment of participants and that kind of stuff. And it was really interesting.
So, what eventually brought you to the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health?
I guess sheer luck. We moved to Ottawa. I guess he wasn't my husband yet, but almost husband was there doing his PhD. So we moved there and I was looking for jobs. And what I was looking for was something that sort of fit with my skill set and fit with my interests. And I found this job as a research assistant. Or this job posting for a research assistant, and the qualifications were like knows experimental design, has heard of health economics, and knows statistics and attention to detail and things like that. So I applied and I got it, and then sort of got a crash course in health technology assessment. And it turns out I really like it.
So, what did that job entail in terms of its day to day?
It was quite varied, but primarily it was looking at scientific literature, figuring, you're doing your project, you get your research questions, you figure out, it's doing reviews, doing literature reviews, doing systematic reviews, sort of things in that wheelhouse, and screening literature, deciding, is this something that could help answer the question, data extraction, doing the contributing to the analysis as a research assistant when I first started, eventually sort of moving through it, did some of the analysis, the critical appraisal of the studies, where you're looking at it and say, okay, are they answering the right questions? Is their sample representative? Are they running the right statistical analyses to actually find something? Those kind of things.
Were you guys doing the meta analysis before the meta analysis was a thing?
Well, I think we were doing meta-analyses while they were a thing. Can you do a meta-analysis before a meta-analysis is a thing?
Well, it's just,
Is it?
like it was a buzzword in the last 5 years, right? Like you'll see it in the
Oh,
media. Oh,
well
there's a
beforehand.
meta-analysis that's being done and it's being concluded that. But this is what scientists do anyway, right? It's
Yes.
force of habit that you scour the literature and look for what's being done, see if it matches what you're hypothesizing and what you can build from there in terms of further knowledge base.
Yeah. Meta-analyses have definitely been a thing for longer than 5 years. But yes, like when you're doing a clinical analysis like that, when you're doing a systematic review, you are looking to do a meta analysis if you can. What is the best answer that we know at the time? And sometimes that means there's only one study that has looked at this, and sometimes there's 10. And then you kind of look at it and say, okay, bringing together these 10 studies, what's the best answer we know now?
So who's reading the documentation that you guys are producing ultimately and the analyses that you guys are.
Yeah. So mostly it's ministries of health. It might be hospitals, it might be provincial ministries of health or health regions. There's a lot that goes into healthcare decision making. And what we can provide is only part of that picture to make that decision. But what we try to do is provide the evidence that's there and say, okay, well, this is what intervention A does for people B, and this is the best answer we have at the time. We realize that there's a lot that goes into your decision making. Here are some of the things you may want to think about in addition to this. So we have a health economics team. Some people look at the patient experiences. There's a lot of different pieces that go into HTA, but even then, a decision maker can take our report and, let's say it says a technology is, really effective, but, within their jurisdiction, it could be that it just doesn't make sense. Maybe they don't have the number of people to support it. You can't, maybe they can't buy a big machine, or they don't have the staff to run it. There's a lot of things that go into that. So, just because we put something out that says, hey, this is a great technology, doesn't make it mean it's a great technology that will work everywhere in every context for everyone. There's a lot that goes into it. And so we just provide a little piece of evidence for that decision making puzzle.
How much has the job evolved as computing technology has evolved? So I imagine when you first started, it was a very different means of researching what was already out there. And now information, it's almost instantaneous at your fingertips. Does it even become more challenging a job in the sense that there's too much information, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite as in it with the studies these days, but I do know that, when I first started, we were waiting for like interlibrary loans and things like that. But now there's, so much that's open access. You barely wait for anything anymore. So there is that. When you think about what's been happening with the COVID literature, when things are being analyzed and being put out there before peer review, because it just makes sense to put that out there just in case. It's the only thing we know right now. So let's put it out there. But it does make it more challenging. You only have so many people and so much time to look at it. So, and to look at the studies, and so, yeah, the more there is, that is wonderful that you might get a more precise answer. There is a point where, yeah, it's too much, or it's almost scientific waste. It's a waste to do another study if we already have a pretty good answer, unless there's, some reason to believe that something has changed and we need to take a closer look.
What made you decide that you wanted to move more into a management position? Was it career advancement? Was it you just wanted something new from your job? What drove you in that direction?
Yeah, it's probably advancement and kind of looking at that big picture. I'd been there for several years and decided, if in order to get any advancement, I needed to further my education. Yeah, it was interest. It was trying to think just a little bit differently and kind of stretch myself and just, yeah, just grow in different ways. Like in a position that wasn't management, there are definitely ways to stretch and learn, and this was just learning in different ways, I think. And I like people, and it gives me more opportunity to talk to people.
The decision to go back to school, though, did come a little bit later in life, right? Like
Yeah.
how old were you when you decided to go back to school?
Yeah, I was about 30. It seemed like a good time, and it was an interesting experience to do that kind of to go back to school, but I felt more prepared to do a master's degree.
What went through your head then as you were about to start? Was there a mixture of excitement? Was it nerves maybe going back to
Oh,
school?
there were a lot of nerves.
Well, I
Um,
can imagine. I still have these recurring nightmares that I've for some ridiculous reason decided to go back and retake organic chemistry. And I don't show up to class because, I have a day job and a life. And I show up to the last class and my teacher, who was my old teacher no less, is very disappointed in me because I haven't done anything. And then I start to write the exam and I completely blank. But
yeah,
it still kind of haunts me. So I can only imagine the nerves of going
yeah.
back to school and even sort of facing all these people who are maybe younger than you.
So I ended up taking a math class at Dawson before I did this master's degree, and in that one, I was definitely old. And that it was kind of a nice intro to getting back to school. But the program I was in, it was actually people, it was designed for people who were in their careers. We all had we all had jobs. I think we all had jobs, maybe one or two didn't, and had been working. It was an older crowd, which was nice. Kind of cool. It was people from all over the world.
So obviously you did well because you got your master's and you got your promotion at work. So what does your current job entail now?
So we do topic identification. We deal with emerging technologies. So a lot of they're early in their life cycle. They haven't been adopted. They may have been adopted elsewhere, but not in Canada yet, or they're quite new. And we sort of look at them and see, okay, is this something that might make a difference? Our decision maker is going to have to think about this, in a couple of years. What is this? Is this important? And also looking at technologies that, yeah, people are going to have to actually make decisions quite soon about. They're, the healthcare system game changers, or it's something new has come along and you actually have to decommission or, disinvest in something because something else is no longer relevant. So we're looking for everything within its life cycle. So I do a lot of talking with people. I do a lot of looking at, the like my team is absolutely wonderful. Um, and we work together to figure out like where are we going to make a difference here and what kind of issues are going to come up in the healthcare system.
So oftentimes I talk to my students about this because they're in the equivalent to what would be U0 anywhere else.
I
Why
don't
do I
know
have
what
to take,
U0 is.
oh, so U0 would like the first year of university
Okay.
everywhere else. So, as CEGEP students, they have to take a chemistry, they have to take their physics, they have to take their biology and their math. Some of them are telling me, well, I want to go into biology, so I don't know why I have to deal with all this physics, and I want to go into chemistry. I don't know why I have to deal with all this calculus, et cetera, et cetera. And I often tell them that when you move into these job fields, there's an importance to either A, being well-rounded and knowing a little bit of everything, or B, picking up some of the lifelong skills along the way that are associated with studying these particular disciplines and having an appreciation for them. Given the current station that you're in right now, where you're reading scientific literature en masse, and it's not necessarily stuff that you're particularly learned in as a
Hmm.
psychologist originally. What is the skill set that you're drawing upon from school, from your university experience, from your even your high school experience that lends well to, say, applying the scientific method to understanding what it is you're reading and then making these judgments about whether or not this technology or this new science is viable or worth investing in?
I mean, it's that critical thinking, which I think you can get with any science. It's looking at this, like looking at things stepwise. It's looking at things um, and thinking, you know, how do you get from A to B? How do you get from A to Z? And I do think a lot of the different science fields lend themselves well to that because you always had to start somewhere. You have to start with your theory, you have to start with your hypothesis, you have to start with, whatever it is. Um, and you have to figure out the steps to get to the end. And I think being well-rounded in that is important. I mean, I probably had those same thoughts. As I said, sort of at the beginning, I hated physics. It didn't make sense to me. And then, all of a sudden it did because I was like, oh, okay, no, this, like, it's actually useful. And you can sort of think it through. I still maintain that the one thing I learned in my science and math education that isn't useful is conics. I still don't think that that's useful at all. Sorry, I got off on a tangent there. Math joke.
A math
Um,
joke.
so yeah, no, I don't. I don't know where I was going with that. Other than, oh, I know. But even within what I do, like I could be looking at, a heart, like a heart valve implant one day, and then the next, a psychological intervention. And the next day, it's a stethoscope that uses AI to help with diagnosis. So having sort of that ability to learn and to read and think critically really serves me. And having taken a lot of different things, a lot of different sciences, or a lot of different social sciences too, I think has helped.
So I was going to ask you next about what you find is most interesting about the job. And I might be projecting, but I imagine it's all the different kinds of things that come across your desk that you get to read about.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. I have learned about so many different healthcare areas, either like both in technologies and just different job types, even when we're speaking with clinical experts. And but yeah, there's a lot of gadgets that are in, in health that are pretty neat. But yeah, it's learning a little bit every day. And then lately too, it's been a lot of learning and talking to people within the healthcare system or within like the regulatory system. That has also been really, really interesting, just to learn how things are regulated, how you go from the research to the, what we do where we sort of synthesize it. And then how does that end up playing out in the healthcare system?
What's the kind of personality that you think would thrive best in a job field like this?
Someone with curiosity, someone that wants to poke around, someone that wants to learn about it, someone that the desire to think both kind of big picture and still the ability to sort of narrow things in focus as well. But for the most part, I think it's curiosity.
So you did speak to some hurdles early on in university in terms of, you were in biology, you weren't
Mhm.
sure if this was a fit, you were failing a couple courses. Did you experience any other struggles in school or any other hurdles?
I did my entire math education in French up until grade 12. And then I entered university in English, and all of a sudden, I didn't know how to think about math in English. And that was an unexpectedly hard thing to do. I had done a lot of my science in French and it was fine, but my brain just did not compute that in English. The math class I took later, like right before I did my master's degree, was also calculus, and I did very well on it. So eventually my mind was able to bring back to it, but I also had to study my butt off. Yeah, that was something that was really unexpected.
We're nearing the end of our time here, Kristen. I want you to think back now upon all these experiences you had, both as a student and then entering the workforce, going back to school. If you have any advice for young people who are navigating these choices right now, what advice would you have for them?
It's been a like, I feel like I'm a little bit out of touch. So I don't feel like I know what the job market as a like beginner into it is right now, but so I'm just gonna put that as a caveat. But I would say in some ways, like it's okay not to know. It's okay not to know exactly what you want to do. And so when in doubt, apply. If something looks interesting to you, if something catches your eye, if you're reading a job posting or if you're reading a, type of degree that it gets you excited, learn more about it and maybe apply. Like I feel like there's so much pressure to know at a young age what you want to do and what you should be like around here. And I don't know if it's the same there too. Like already in high school, at specialized high schools where like at 12 you're supposed to know if you want to be in the science stream or the sports stream or the art stream. And I feel like that's almost a disservice
Absolutely.
to the kids that just don't know and they just want to figure it out. It's okay not to have an answer for where you want to be in 10 years. I recognize it's a bit of there's some privilege in changing courses and in trying things out, because there are people that don't really have that luxury of of stopping and trying again. But you just might find something that really suits you if you change courses, if you go along a path that you weren't expecting. Yeah, like I would just say my advice would be to keep an open mind. And I mean, it's awesome if you already know. That's great, but it's okay if you don't.
I think that's some pretty good sage advice there, Kristen. I want to thank you again for taking some time out of your day to join me here with this podcast. I think you have an interesting narrative, and I'm glad that you were open enough to share this with people and to talk about your experiences. And I hope to catch up with you again soon.
Thanks, John. It was great to talk to you.
And so concludes this episode of the podcast series Careers in Science. I've been your host, Sean Hughes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe to the page. And if you have suggestions for any other careers you'd like to see profiled in this series, be sure to leave a comment. Thank you for listening, and bye for now.